Rational Wellness Podcasters. Dr. Ben Weitz here. I'm so glad you could join me today for another episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. Each week, I'll be bringing you the latest cutting-edge information on health and nutrition. In this media-driven world, it's easy to be confused about what's true and what's not. I'll cut through the conflicting headlines to bring you clarity, to help you optimize your health and maximize your life. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. None of the information in this podcast is intended to diagnose any condition, and this podcast is not intended to substitute for going to see your medical doctor and getting sound medical advice. So let's get started on your path to better health.
You think just finding its way in we are.
Welcome, Rational Wellness Podcasters. I'm so glad you could join me again today, and I'm really excited for this topic today. We're going to talk about fluoride and fluoride toxicity and water fluoridation, which I think is an incredibly important topic, often not discussed, and could have profound implications for our health, especially long term. And today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Paul Connett. I heard Dr. Connett on my friend Suzanne Bennett's Wellness for Life podcast, and he had some really interesting information about fluoride. So I knew I had to get him on and share some of this information with my listeners. So Dr. Paul Connett has a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College, and he taught chemistry and toxicology at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York for 23 years. Dr. Connett is a prominent critic of water fluoridation and executive director of the Fluoride Action Network, and he speaks all around the world. So Dr. Connett, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Ben. Just a quick update. I'm no longer the director of the Fluoride Action Network. I was director from 2000 to 2015, but I retired on my 75th birthday in October of 2016. Now I'm the senior advisor actually on the 2015. So since then, I've been senior advisor to the Fluoride Action Network.
That's great. Excellent. So for the first question, I'd like to ask you some information about fluoride. You know, does the human body have a need for fluoride at all?
Well, this is a very good question. And it's where I began. My wife persuaded me to get involved in this issue in 1996. I didn't want it. She put these papers on my desk and said, "Would you read these?" I said, "What is it?" And she said, "Fluoridation, water fluoridation." I said, "Take it away. These people are crazy." But she persuaded me to read these papers. And one of the first things I found, which really shook me, because I really thought that the opponents of fluoridation had confused fluorine with fluoride, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what was so striking is that the level in mother's milk, baby's first meal, what evolution has determined that the baby needs for healthy development, had practically no fluoride in it. And this didn't make sense to me. If, in fact, you needed fluoride, why wasn't it in baby's first meal? The level is remarkably low, 0.004 parts per million. And to put that into perspective, that low number, we fluoridate now at 0.7 parts per million, 0.7. So that means that a bottle-fed baby in a fluoridated community is getting nearly 200 times as much fluoride as nature intended. In other words, mother's breast milk protects the baby from fluoride, and water fluoridation removes that protection. Now, to go on with this business, what I felt was that the body doesn't need fluoride if it's not in mother's milk. Okay, so then I pursued it further, and there is not one single substance in the body that needs fluoride inside the body, inside the mainstream of biochemistry. There's not a nucleic acid, protein, metabolite in the body that contains fluoride or needs fluoride for action. No enzyme needs fluoride. Nothing needs fluoride inside the body. And as far as tooth decay is concerned, that works topically. The fluoride may or may not help on the surface of the enamel, but it doesn't work through swallowing.
And of course, the main reason why water is fluoridated is ostensibly claims that it protects the teeth and reduces dental caries.
That's right. That's right. But it seems remarkable to me in evolution that nature has not used fluoride in any way in the mainstream of biochemistry. I mean, nature is very efficient. So it usually finds a niche for every element. I mean, it doesn't have many elements to choose from. It has about 80 metals to choose from, and it uses a lot of those metals, and it only has a dozen or so non-metals. And many of those non-metals it's used, like phosphorus and sulfur and nitrogen and iodine and oxygen and hydrogen. But it doesn't use fluorine. And then the next thing is, if you want to show that a substance is a nutrient, an essential nutrient, you have to starve the animal of that substance in its diet and demonstrate that the disease accrues. And if you don't get a disease, then obviously it is not a nutrient. Well, they've never demonstrated a deficiency of fluoride, a disease caused by a deficiency of fluoride. And certainly tooth decay is not caused by an absence of fluoride or too little fluoride. Tooth decay is caused by too much sugar, which leads to production of acids in the mouth, which attack the enamel of the surface. And if it goes far enough in, it starts to produce decay. So it's a weird thing. And that's on the one side. You can't find a use for it inside the body.
Right.
Okay. The second thing is it's very toxic. Biochemists have known for years that fluoride is extremely toxic. At high doses, it can kill you, but we're not talking about killing people with water fluoridation. But what we are concerned about is the possibility that fluoride is interfering with very basic biological things, like it interferes with enzymes, it interferes with hydrogen bonds, it combines with metal ions like calcium and magnesium, preventing them from doing their work. And many of these things are happening at low levels, And then, of course, we have a litany of health effects, which seem to be more and more, the evidence seems to be more and more convincing that fluoride is causing toxic effects in the body. And the one that they can't deny, the promoters cannot deny, is dental fluorosis, which is a discoloration and mottling of the enamel. And they can't deny that because they knew that fluoride caused dental fluorosis before they started fluoridating the water. Back in the 1930s, they knew that fluoride caused this mottling of the teeth. But they thought when they started fluoridation in 1945, they could limit the amount of dental fluorosis or limit the number of kids with dental fluorosis at the same time reducing tooth decay. And the optimum level they thought for doing that was 1 part per million. Now, because so many kids are getting dental fluorosis in the United States, over 50% of children in the United States now have
over 50%.
Yes, are getting some form of dental fluorosis.
Wow.
And the latest Haynes data shows 60%, so I think 61%, and 20% have moderate dental fluorosis, which is affects 100% of the enamel. But regardless of the appearance of this and whether or not this should be considered a health effect, the important thing is it's an indicator that a child has been overexposed to fluoride. So we're in a situation now when we know that over half of our kids have been overexposed to fluoride. We know that by what we can see with the naked eye, this damage to the tooth enamel. But an open question and a serious question is that what is it doing to the baby's developing tissues, which you can't see? What about damage to the bone? The teeth grow out of the bone. What about damage to the brain? What about damage to the endocrine system, the thyroid gland, and so on? There was a tremendous review of this toxicity that we're concerned about by the National Research Council. They did that in 2006. It was a well-done study. They had 12 scientists reviewing it. They thought it would take a year, but it took 3.5 years. And it was a balanced panel. They had 3 pro-fluoridation, 3 anti-fluoridation, and 6 who were undeclared publicly. And I got to testify before this panel in 2003. And I'm happy to say that many of my concerns were reflected in the final text. But right now, that's the Bible for the toxicology of fluoride. And they had chapters on the brain, chapters on the endocrine system, chapters on the bone, and so on. So there's absolutely no question, Ben, that fluoride damages the body, damages many different tissues in the body. The only open question is, does this damage occur at exposure levels, which we get today, at exposure levels which are causing dental fluorosis in over 50% of our children? And I think the latest studies do indicate that. And the most important, there's now over 300 animal and human studies which shows that fluoride is neurotoxic, that fluoride can damage the brain. Over 200 animal studies which indicate that fluoride can enter the brain, damage various receptors, interfere with various enzymes and so on in the brain. So that's on the one hand, that's biochemistry. Then you have animal behavior studies. They put animals in mazes, and you compare animals which have been exposed to fluoride and those that haven't been exposed to fluoride. And the beauty of animal experiments is that you can keep everything else the same. You can keep their living conditions, their food, their water, everything the same, except the one chemical that you're looking at, in this case, fluoride. And it turns out that out of something like 36 of these maze studies, and we're getting more with each passing month, something like 34 out of 36 of these maze studies shows that the animals exposed to fluoride are less able to remember in the maze where the cheese is. They're less able to memorize, less able to learn. Now that's important. As I say, it's very highly controlled because the only thing that varies between the two animals is exposure to fluoride. But this is very consistent with the IQ studies. Now these IQ studies have been done in China, in India, Iran, and Mexico, and one in New Zealand. And of these studies, 51 out of 58, I think it is, 51 out of 58 shows that children in villages in which there's been high exposure to fluoride compared to villages with low exposure to fluoride have lower IQ, the mean IQ of the children in the high fluoride village. And when I say high fluoride village, that's to distinguish between high and low. It's not very high in terms of exposure in fluoridated communities. By the way, in these cases, it's natural fluoride in the water. Now, let me give you chapter and verse on this because I've just co-authored a study published in late 2016, which looked at one of the best of these IQ studies from China, where they controlled for lead, they controlled for iodine, they controlled for arsenic.
That was a Harvard study?
Now, well, Harvard was a meta-analysis of 27.
Oh, okay.
A meta-analysis of 27 studies, and they said there were many weaknesses in the studies, but the consistency of the studies was impressive. So out of 27 of these studies, 26 showed a lowering of IQ.
Wow.
And so and a lowering of 7 IQ points, which is substantial. Now, the study I'm talking is one of the best studies in those 27 studies. This was done by Zhang in 2003. In 2004, I actually went to the villages where he did the study. And the difference between the fluoride levels in the water was not huge. In the average of the fluoride concentrations in this well water in the low fluoride village was about 0.36 parts per million. And the average in the high fluoride village was 2.5 parts per million. Remember, we fluoridate at 0.7.
Right.
So you're less than 10 times the level at which we fluoridate. Now, the beauty of Zhang's work is he subdivided the high fluoride village into 5 subgroups of various sizes. And in the subgroups, the difference between these subgroups was an escalation of the fluoride concentrations within the range, okay? So of the 5 subdivisions, it was something like this. The lowest group was 0.75 parts per million. The next group was 1.5 parts per million. The next was 2 point something. The next was 3 point something. The next was 4. So you have this graduation of fluoride concentrations in subgroups going from 0.75 to 4 parts per million. Now, this is only the high fluoride village. So we've knocked out any confounding factors between the two villages. And there was not a question of different pollution levels between the two villages. This is within one village only. And as in his study, as the fluoride concentration goes up, 2 things happen. One is that the IQ goes down systematically. It's a linear response. As the fluoride concentration goes up from 0.75 to 4 parts per million, there's a steady decrease in IQ. And he also found that the percentage of children in borderline IQ, mentally handicapped, that's an IQ less than 80, and outright mentally handicapped, IQ less than 70. So in that group, which encompasses both borderline and outright mental handicap, that number dramatically increases as the fluoride concentration goes up. So there was none in the 0.75 group, but when you went up to 1.5, it went up to 10%. And then by the time you got to 4 parts per million, there were 37.5% of the kids in this mentally handicapped area. So this is really very, very serious. When you start shifting the whole IQ curve down, you decrease the number of very bright people in your society, and you dramatically increase the number of children who are mentally handicapped. That's very, very serious. Now the numbers. If you analyze this with standard risk assessment techniques, and our lead author was from the EPA, he's now retired, Bill Hersey, who's done this many times for other substances. He found that in this study, and when you calculate the dose now, we started with concentration, but with knowing how much fluoride was in the food, etc., they were able to calculate the dose. And it turns out that 1.4 milligrams per day for these children lowered the IQ by 5 IQ points. 1.4 milligrams per day lowered the IQ of these children by 5 IQ points. Wow. Now, let's put that into perspective again. We fluoridate at 0.7 parts per million. A child drinking 2 liters of water, fluoridated water in the United States, is going to get that level, 1.4 milligrams per day. Well, you can say, well, not many children drink as much as 2 liters of water a day. Some do, especially athletes. But then you've got to add in the fluoride that they're getting from other sources. Fluoride from toothpaste and other dental products. Fluoride from pesticide and fertilizer residue in our foods. And fluoride from things like tea, which are naturally in fish, which are naturally fish bones, are naturally high in fluoride. And incidentally, they don't deny that. When we talk about the dental fluorosis rates, they say, oh, well, that's not caused by water fluoridation. That's caused by these other sources of fluoride. Exactly. We have to be concerned about the total dose of fluoride that each child can get. And we have to recognize that we really have no way of controlling that dose, because you can't control how much water children drink, nor can we control how much they get from these other sources. So when you subtract those other sources from 1.4 milligrams per day, yes, our children are getting levels of fluoride, which in this Chinese situation was lowering their IQ by 5 IQ points. And now, let me tell you, if you lowered the whole IQ, they shifted the IQ range of the children in the United States over by 5 IQ points, you would halve the number of geniuses in your society, and you double the number of mentally handicapped. That would have huge economic and social ramifications for the United States.
Paul, these things you're saying, this is unbelievable. Why isn't this on the front page of every newspaper right now? That 50% of the kids are getting discoloration of their teeth from fluoride toxicity, all the money everybody's spending to get their teeth white and looking good and braces and everything else. And now you're talking about lowering of IQ and the impact economically and everything else on families and this country. It's unbelievable. And nobody's even talking about it.
Ben, this is why after 21 years of doing this, of hitting my head against the wall and literally watching the brain pulp ooze out of my skull, it's just maddening. It's that no one is listening. The media is not listening. They don't listen. They just insult us. They call us crazy people. And of course, it does make you crazy when no one listens to you. I'm a scientist. I taught chemistry for a living. I've written a book on this subject, but they still say, oh, they're flat earth society, they're junk scientists and all this stuff. I say, read my book. It's been out for 7 years. There's not been a cogent scientific response to that book. But look at it again. Look at what we are doing in this society. Look at Flint, Michigan. Look at the furor about what we were doing in Flint. We were adding a neurotoxic substance to the drinking water, lead. And for years we've been concerned about lead. Because it's neurotoxic. It lowers the IQ of children. So over the years, we got the lead out of paint, we got the lead out of gasoline, and thank God, on average, the levels of lead in children's brains is going down, and their IQ is being affected less and less. But the same agencies that express concern about lead are standing by and letting us, and deliberately adding another neurotoxic substance, fluoride, to the drinking water. It's unbelievable. It's Kafkaesque. I mean, if you've got any notion that a substance out there is causing lowering of IQ in children, you move heaven and earth to prevent that. And here, as I said, we're deliberately adding it to the drinking water. And the only defense is they don't think that these studies are high quality enough. But I've explained to you, it isn't just 1 or 2 IQ studies. We got over 50. And it isn't just human studies, it's animal studies, animal behavior studies. And it isn't just animal behavior studies, it's biochemical studies, which shows that fluoride damages the brain. See, you've got to take a weight of evidence approach to this. And let me be as generous as possible here. Let me be as generous as I can. Let me say, maybe not, apart from Zhang, which I think is pretty powerful, maybe none of these studies rise to the level that causes immediate action. But what you have to admit is that we have 300 red flags being waved here, 300 consistent red flags from different areas of study. And so my question to the EPA, to the CDC, to the Department of Health and Human Services, who continue to promote this wretched practice, is where are your green flags? Where are the studies, the primary studies that you have read, which have given you the confidence to continue with this practice with these red flags waving, with 300 red flags waving? And they can't do it, Ben. They cannot produce a significant list of studies of quality, which would allow anybody to say, well, I look in your scale pan and I see X number of studies which says it's okay, and I look into their scale pan and I see over 300 studies which says it's not okay. And clearly, we've got no reason to worry because there are far more green flags than red flags. They can't do that, and yet they continue. And the only way you can explain this, the rational explanation, is they're working backwards. They're working backwards from some perceived need to keep this practice going regardless, to keep it going. There's something driving this forward, which is more important than protecting the health of our children.
What is it that's driving this forward? Why is the ADA, why are all these agencies continuing to promote this practice that seems to be a crazy way to, to try to correct a perceived problem? And
they would say, if you ask them that, they would say because the evidence of harm is very weak, and the evidence that swallowing fluoride lowers tooth decay is very, very strong. That's what they would say, and this is an important public health policy and so on. But this doesn't hold water because the evidence that they've done no randomized controlled trial to demonstrate that swallowing fluoride actually lowers tooth decay. That's the gold standard for epidemiological studies, health studies, is a randomized controlled trial. Never done it. And moreover, if you want a more common sense approach, if you look at tooth decay in 12-year-olds in between countries, fluoridated and non-fluoridated, according to World Health Organization data worldwide, the tooth decay in 12-year-olds is coming down as fast, if not faster, in non-fluoridated countries compared to fluoridated ones. And whilst you're at it, most of the countries in the world are non-fluoridated. The odd one, the fluoridated ones are the odd ones out. So in America, you're made to believe that fluoridation is the norm. Everybody's doing this. Well, in the United States, almost everybody's doing it. 70% of the people on public water supplies are drinking fluoridated water. Yes. And there's a handful of other countries that do this. Australia, New Zealand, Ireland. Ireland has mandatory fluoridation, incredibly. And Canada has about 30% fluoridation, but it's only a handful of countries. In fact, over half the people drinking fluoridated water live in the United States. So we're not the norm. And the reason we're not the norm is, let me say it loud and clear, using the public water supply to deliver any medicine is foolish. It's irresponsible. Because once you put a medicine in the water supply, and we only put fluoride in the water, not to treat the water, but to use the water supply as a convenient and lazy system to deliver this drug to the whole population. You know, for them it seems simple. But once you put a medicine in the water, as I'm sure you know, Ben, you can't control the dose.
Right.
Because you can't control how much water people drink. And you can't control what they're getting from other sources. Secondly, you can't control who it gets to. It goes to everybody, including bottle-fed infants, seniors, people with health conditions, people with poor nutrition, people that certainly shouldn't get fluoride, like people with poor kidney function, because they can't get rid of it as a normal person can up to a point. And thirdly, you're violating the individual's right to informed consent to medication. And that's why, incidentally, with those three things, we've never done it with any other drug, even though you've got crazy doctors out there asking to put lithium in the drinking water and statins to the drinking water. Yeah, unbelievable, but they're not getting anywhere. Because with every other substance, except this protective pollutant called fluoride, the normal rules apply. You don't do it because you can't control the dose, you can't control who it goes to, and you don't want to violate the individual's right to informed consent. But here's another reason which should interest doctors. And it's the difference between individually supervised medicine and public medicine, which is not supervised. As a toxicologist, I can assure you that for every toxic substance there's a normal distribution of response. The average person will have an average response to that drug and or toxic substance. And there will be some people that are very resistant to the toxicity of that substance. And there will be some people, these are the two tails now, that are very vulnerable, very sensitive to the toxic effects. That's a mathematical thing. It's a mathematical explanation of what we mean by a normal distribution in a human population. Some people are much more sensitive than others. Now, with individualized medicine, the doctor can try to take that into account. He or she can say, am I dealing with somebody who's very likely to be very sensitive to this substance, this fluoride, this drug? Or am I dealing with an average person? So you go tentatively as to see if this person is super sensitive to this drug. And you play around with concentrations and so on. But you remove that, which means it is inevitable that this practice is harming some people. There are people at that tail end of vulnerability in the normal distribution. Now, the doctor, why on earth, when you say, why isn't there an outcry? Why isn't there an outcry from doctors? Because doctors know two things. They know that they're not supposed to give medicine or medical treatment to anybody without their informed consent. That has been ripped away by this practice. And secondly, the Hippocratic oath is first, do no harm. If you expose everybody to a toxic substance, you know you're going to do harm to some people. You might help some people, but you know that you're going to harm others. This is, to me, the horrifying difference between applying medicine on an individual basis and applying medicine on a public level, on a mass level. It's just unacceptable. So whilst I've struggled for 21 years to understand the mechanisms of action, the toxicity of fluoride, and so on, you don't need to know all that to oppose water fluoridation and raise your voice. All you have to know is that this is an unethical practice. And also it would help you to know that in other countries which don't practice water fluoridation, they have found ways of treating children, even children on low income, families from low income, effectively without forcing them to swallow fluoride. Child Smile program in Scotland is based upon teaching children how to brush their teeth when they're in their first school, in kindergarten or primary school, how to brush their teeth. They involve the parents in the educational exercise. They also give them healthy snacks in school, and they teach the parents what kind of food they need for healthy teeth and healthy growth, less sugar. And in Denmark, they have a program which involves house visits from children starting at 8 months and going up to 18. And they've shown dramatic reductions in tooth decay. Comparing the towns where they've done this with the average of Denmark, Denmark has the lowest tooth decay rates in the world, and yet where they've done this, the so-called Nexo program, over 15 or 20 years, the tooth decay rates are 1/5 of the best in the world.
Wow. And isn't it interesting that the type of fluoride that they're putting into the water is not even some purified form of natural fluoride, if there is such a thing, but it's coming from a byproduct from fertilizer industries. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, because most dentists have no idea that that is the case. Dr. Hardy Lineback, when he heard that that was what was happening, he stopped supporting water fluoridation. Dr. Hardy Lineback was on that National Research Council review panel I mentioned earlier on, published in 2006. He was also one of Canada's leading dental researchers, president of the Canadian Association for Dental Research. So one of Canada's leading dental experts, when he heard that they were using this industrial waste product to fluoridate the water, and not what he assumed was pharmaceutical grade fluoride. He flipped out, apologized to his students and faculty members, and has been opposing fluoridation ever since.
So not only do these industries have to pay to get rid of this waste, they're actually getting paid for poisoning our citizens.
Yeah, let me just spell this out so that people are in no doubt about this. You'll find it, I think it's chapter 3 of my book, The Source of the Fluoride. What happens when you're making phosphate fertilizer, superphosphate, is you take phosphate rock, which is insoluble in water, and you treat it with concentrated sulfuric acid. And that drives off phosphoric acid. But it also drives off and makes two very toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. And for about 100 years, all around these phosphate plants, you would found damaged vegetation, damage to the citrus groves in Florida, damage to cattle eating the grass on which
I can't see the bottom half of your face, Paul. Maybe.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
There you go. That's better. Thanks.
Sorry about that. And so after 100 years, they required the industry to put scrubbers on, which was a spray of water. And that converts these two toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride, into a new substance called hexafluorosilicic acid. Don't worry about the name. The formula is easier to remember, H2SiF6. Well, they're not allowed to dump this stuff into the sea by international law. They can't dump it locally because it's far too concentrated. But if they can sell it to somebody, it stops being a hazardous waste and becomes a product. And so by the very act of the public water supply people, the public water departments buying this hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer industry, it converts it into a product. It's no longer regulated as a hazardous waste, and it goes into our drinking water. It's absolutely insane. It's utterly irresponsible. And I can't believe, again, like the health effects that I've mentioned to you, particularly neurotoxicity, how it is that the mainstream media continue to remain silent on this, but even worse, when they get a chance to mention Dr. Strangelove and make fun of anybody opposed to fluoridation, they do so. But what they don't do is to give people both sides. I don't want our side in exclusion. I want both sides in the media. I want both sides. I want mainstream media like the New York Times, the Washington Post, after 70 years of this nonsense, to look at both sides with an open mind. And I'm sick and tired of that open mind being so overwhelmingly open when it's a political issue. But when it's an issue which affects the health of millions of people and has become political because it's a protected practice, that's too much to take. You know, the press is important to us. A free press is important to us. And the only people that are exercising their right on this to be a free press on this issue is radio stations and outlets like yourself. You are doing what the mainstream is not doing. But you asked me a question before, Ben, and I didn't answer it completely. You asked me, why do I think they're more interested in protecting this practice than in protecting our health? Why has it become so political? And I will put it this way. When policy becomes king, science becomes a slave. This is the working backwards. You look at the science through a sieve. If it supports your policy, it's acceptable. If it doesn't support your policy, it's unacceptable. So why are they doing that? And my answer is, and this is sheer conjecture, they fear if they lose fluoridation after waxing lyrical on this for over 70 years, they will lose their credibility. And if they lose their credibility, they lose the public's trust, And what does that mean? People will lose their trust in other public health practices. And when you look at other public health practices, what is the first one that comes zooming up? And the answer is vaccination. Now, whilst fluoridation is not worth a hill of beans in practical terms. We're talking about over a lifetime saving one cavity. This, if you look at the best studies, a saving of one cavity over a lifetime. And for that, you're going to risk children's brains. It's not worth a hill of beans, but of course, vaccination is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think vaccination is being defended by proxy by those guys keeping fluoridation going at all costs, because they're frightened of that credibility hit, which would hurt these other public health issues.
Wow.
So just think of it for a moment. On vaccination, Robert Kennedy describes the CDC as a cesspool of corruption. Now, immediately anybody from the other side hears, oh, I knew it. Connett is anti-vaccination. I'm not anti-vaccination per se. I will say I think children get far too many vaccines. I don't think babies should be injected at 1 day of age against a sexually transmitted disease. And I don't think vaccines should contain organic mercury and aluminium as an adjuvant. There are a lot of problems with vaccination, but I'm not opposed to vaccination in principle. But when you see what the pharmaceutical lobby has allowed to happen in the United States, in allowing vaccine manufacturers no liability, they cannot be sued for any damage that's caused, that the government, the taxpayer has taken over all liability. And since that time in the 1980s, the number of vaccines that are now out there has increased exponentially. The number of kids getting now something like 48 jabs before they're a few months old. And people are making a huge amount of money on this, including the CDC. Well, having said all that, the CDC is the big promoter of fluoridation in this country. They hold no brief on the safety of fluoride. In fact, they're way out of date on the safety studies. Whenever they talk about fluoridation, they're way out of date. But they promote it. They see their function. When I say CDC, I'm talking here about the oral health division. So when you see almost every day somewhere in the world is quoting the CDC as saying that fluoridation is one of the top 20 public health achievements of the 20th century. It's actually one of the top frauds of the 20th century. But when people hear that, they the CDC. Now that's an agency of about 30,000 scientists down in Atlanta, Georgia. They know about everything to do with health. No, it isn't an agency of 30,000 that's saying this. It's a division of 30 people that are nearly all dentists who got the one-sided training on fluoride at dental school, and it's tweedledum between the CDC and the ADA. Whatever the ADA says today, the CDC Oral Health Division will say tomorrow. It's a tweedledum ADA, tweedledee, CDC scam of the American public, telling them that fluoridation is safe and effective when they don't have much evidence for either.
You know, I think we got to get to the dentists and we got to educate them because they're spreading a lot of this information and they just don't know.
No. Well, first of all, I'd like a student out there that needs a master's degree to go through all the dental schools in the United States and look at their curricula, see what books are assigned for. This is what I had to do when I was a professor at university. I had to provide my curricula in public and also the curriculum and the books that I set for both set books and recommended texts. So I would like to see the curricula for dental schools to see how many lessons they give on fluoridation and whether or not they give pro and anti, which they're required to do. Any academic institution, or especially when the issue is controversial, is expected to give both sides, and you would expect the literature to reflect that. That would be a very good exercise, and I would predict right now that student will find very, very few dental schools in the United States and the other fluoridated countries which give both sides of this issue to their students. And of course, the trouble with that is that once the students have left dental school and join a practice, then they're so busy treating patients that they have little time to read the literature. And then they're just very vulnerable because they take at face value what the CDC says and what the ADA says without recognizing that both agencies are and organizations are totally biased on this issue. But the sadder thing from my point of view is doctors. Doctors are sort of treating this issue as the province of dentists, that this is the dental issue. Well, it's not a dental issue. It's a whole body issue. Doctors should be getting involved. And for that matter, people in education should be getting involved. If indeed I'm right, that this practice is lowering IQ of children in the United States, it's the Department of Education that should be concerned. They should be putting pressure on the Department of Health to do something about this foolish and reckless practice. So more doctors should be speaking out. More doctors should be speaking out on the ethics of forcing medication on people who don't want it, and on the notion that you cannot apply medicine on a mass level without damaging some people. Some people are going to be super sensitive. And whilst we're at it, we need more academics looking at this as a scientific issue. But Ben, there is some good news on the academic front. Since about 2012, starting with Ron Breaker at Yale University, biochemists are finding defense mechanisms for fluoride in many different organisms, starting with bacteria and going through multicellular species, through fungi and maybe some animals. There are genes in these species which code for proteins which export fluoride from the cell.
Wow.
And the notion then is that if a bacteria is heavily exposed to fluoride or just overexposed to fluoride, it will trigger the production of these proteins which go into the membrane and pump fluoride out of the cell. So, and I think it should be interesting to people. This goes right back to the beginning of our discussion about nature's attitude to fluoride. It didn't seem to use it in any way, but it has given evidence that it's protecting a whole variety of species from fluoride with these proteins which export. They're called fluoride exporting proteins, FEX proteins. So anybody who's interested in science, go to the literature, look up Breaker, Breaker, fluoride exporting proteins. What I'm hoping is, starting with Yale and other universities which are looking at this, it will involve a lot more young scientists who haven't been brainwashed into looking at the toxicity of fluoride. And when they do that, hopefully at the end of the day, they're going to scratch their heads as to why we are allowing this substance to be deliberately added to the drinking water. And hopefully then they will start to look at the studies that fluoride lowers thyroid function, fluoride interferes with the brain, fluoride accumulates in the bone and causes symptoms like arthritis. It makes the bones brittle over a lifetime, may increase hip fractures. There's so many health concerns which have never been studied objectively and fairly by the promoters of fluoridation. And this is the sad thing. When you take a substance or an off the table as far as allowing academics to look at it with an open mind, it's very, very dangerous for science, and it's very dangerous for health when this becomes a public health policy. Because right now we have literally thousands of doctors that are unaware of fluoride's toxicity, are unaware of symptoms that the most sensitive are experiencing, and are misdiagnosing them and treating them recklessly for other things, so that they're not getting to the point. We must have academia insisting on
Paul, your microphone. I think you just hit your microphone or something.
I'm sorry. I'm here. Can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you, but now I can only see the top of your head.
Okay. Can you see me now? It's okay.
There you go. That's better. Okay. So Paul, I have to wrap it up, but I have to tell you, this has been an amazing conversation, and the information that you've been providing in this video needs to get out. I will tell you that even though the mainstream medical community may thus far not have been that receptive to it, I can tell you that that the functional medicine community, I think, is interested in this information. And I'm going to do my best to spread this information to those who haven't heard it. And to wrap this up, can you tell us about your latest book, what it's called, and then how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to, your website?
Yes. Well, I've written two books recently. In 2010, I wrote The Case Against Fluoride, and that's published by Chelsea Green, 2010.
Okay.
With two other authors, Connett, Beck, and Micklem. But in 2013, I wrote another book on my other issue, which is waste management. That's called The Zero Waste Solution, and Untrashing the Planet One Community at a Time. And actually, that's my major issue. That's occupied me for 32 years, whereas fluoridation has only occupied me for 31 years. But I need the zero waste to keep me sane. It's a real positive experience. So zero waste for sustainability is very positive. They like me on that. And the other one depresses the hell out of me. And Ben, your program has been like mental therapy. You put me on this bench, and you were nice soft cushions. You said, lay back, Paul. Tell me what you're not allowed to speak about. And our web page is fluoridaction.net. And if you like that web page, I think it's the best in the world. It's got the best database. Look on researchers in the top right-hand corner. You will have access to the best health database on fluoride in the world. That was done by my son, Michael. And then if you look on the top line, you'll see Fan TV, where you can see a whole bunch of videotapes. The one I particularly like is called Professional Perspectives on Water Fluoridation. And that's 15 scientists from around the world talking about this. So it isn't just one crazy scientist here. There's a lot of them out there. Once a Nobel Prize winner. In terms of connecting with me, and I should say this, I am prepared to travel anywhere in the world to talk to an audience, preferably an audience that's either completely hasn't taken a position on this, so they've got open-minded. They're open-minded. You know, if they're Dr. Connett, I've never heard about this before. This is terrible. Tell us all about it. That would be lovely. Or I would be happy to talk to a hostile audience. I would like to be invited by dentists to, like state dental societies or even the ADA and talk in the enemy's cage. Give them our position. Let them attack me. I mean, I've done that with waste management. I've been in the den of the people that promote incineration worldwide, and they listen to my case, the arguments against incineration and the arguments for the alternatives. But the other side will not do that. We can only rarely in 21 years, or maybe 10 times, have I had a debate with the other side. And if they had the science, none of this would happen. They would do the studies. They wouldn't attack us. They would have a written response by now to our book, and they haven't done that. But anyway, I'm prepared to go anywhere, and I'm prepared to debate anyone in the world on this issue. If my expenses are covered, I do not charge a fee. I'll be happy to do that. So if you do get any traction with the functional medicine folks, I'll be happy to talk to any of their conferences.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Connett.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for the mental therapy. It was wonderful.
You're providing a great service for humanity. Okay.
Oh,
Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.